Welcome and thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on feels like a Tuesday in South Africa at least, but it's actually Thursday the 26th. So thank you for joining us. We have a short week in South Africa, but hopefully the audience, the extended audience joining us from the far reaches, EMEA, Africa, our time zones. Hopefully you've had a good week. And thank you for joining us to discuss something very topical in the cybersecurity world and environment. With me, I've got Jason Soronko from Sectigo. Between the two of us, we'd like to take you through the obvious problem statement in the conversation today around the industry's decision to invoke a distrust of the Entrust CAs, what impact that would have to you as customers, to you as partners, and eventually also consumers of secured services, and the concepts around certificates and certificate management inside our daily lives and routines. So I'd like to thank you, and then I'd like to quickly kick off and start. So as per the conversation, and this is quite common information at this stage, around about the 25th of June, the Google Root Trust Authority, or the Chromium Root Trust Authority team, announced its intention to invoke a distrust of the Entrust CA. Now, the resulting thing is, and for those that understand certificates, obviously your CAs or your contextual certificate authorities, and then all other certificates are trusted underneath that actual root CA. So what is happening right now is the likes of Google via the Chromium Root OS perspective, and then subsequently also Mozilla joined the bandwagon. They have said that, guys, we are going to distrust any certificates with STL dates after the 12th of November. So I'm going to quickly take you through what that means, and how that can actually affect you in the organization. The first thing I would like to ask, and be quite interactive about this, is Rafiel is going to quickly post a poll on the Q&A section. The first poll that we have is essentially going to be, are you aware if your organization is using Entrust certificates inside the organization? And obviously answers are unsure, yes in some places, and no. So please quickly fill in that poll if you can. Much appreciated. So as per the context of what we're trying to disclose is public information, obviously available to anyone. With a simple Google search, you'll find this information. So what we're trying to achieve today is not to specifically be negative towards Entrust as a vendor, but we're essentially sharing the context of how that affects us as organizations, right? And what alternate options there are going to be from a solution perspective. So that distrust stems from what's called a signed certificate timestamp, an SCT time. Now, this is the date at which a certificate starts, not necessarily the date at which a certificate ends. So that's vitally important in the context of our conversation. A certificate that is minted to start after the 12th of November will no longer be trusted. You'll get a warning sign on any device that is utilizing the Chrome CA root store, the trusted root store, in Mozilla root store as well. That means that connection will seem, number one, unauthentic, and number two, could cause disruptions from a endpoint and a user and a consumer perspective. Okay, so that is the context. There is certificates that will remain valid from Entrust if their SCT dates are prior to November the 11th. It's actually November 12th. I'll expand on that in the next slide. But essentially, if it's minted before that date, it should still stay valid. That gives customers and it gives organizations time to obviously go through the process of either changing their process and or trusting the vetting process in the back end. In more detail, what does this distrust mean? On the 12th of September, the Common CA database group and one of the guys over there that heads it up working for Google, his name is Ryan Dixon. He also published the initial article on the 25th of June on their Google Chrome, on their Google Forum site. And essentially on the 12th of September, they changed it now to be the 12th of November instead of the 11th of November. So any SCT created on the 12th will come into effect on the 12th. This also, from an informational perspective, for anyone that would like to go read up on this, there's the link at the bottom of the page. Obviously, these slides will be shared where you can actually go view the contextual technical information as to why the distrust has happened and what their motivations and reasons were. To cut a long story short, there are specific parameters of adherence that this Common CA database group, and we have the likes of Microsoft, Google, Cisco, all of them are part of this advisory group, and they've set these requirements on any trusted CA route organization. And they stem from either providing validity to the types of organizations requesting certificates, validity in terms of the processes internal to the organization, how the incident logging and takedowns are actually taking place from a incorrect usage or a pattern of misuse for specific tokens. All of those items stem from researchers that conduct these research sessions, and those outcomes are then used as, let's call it KPIs, to keep all of the root CAs in check, ensuring that their processes and policies can't be misabused for nefarious purposes. What happened was Entrust failed on numerous of those metric points, and it was quite apparently, as far as I can do from a research perspective, it was quite a lengthy and ongoing process of this the CCAD team that engaged with Entrust, and no correspondence that led to the distrust essentially at the end of the day. Now, for us in the world, what does that mean? We live in a modern age where Chromium-based browsers, at least, are not only dominating the market, but are in utilization in excess of 67% across all the vertices. Be that from the combination of Chromium on Android, Chrome browsers, and Chrome-based browsers on Windows. That would include the latest Edge interfaces. That would include the latest Opera interfaces. Anything from a web browser perspective that utilizes a Google CA cert would then distrust these websites going forward and distrust those certificates going forward. So the same goes on mobile devices. It also, the same goes for, and I'm going to mention this explicitly, the same goes for any APIs that are web-based and utilizing the certificates itself. So if you've got applications as a service provider and those applications are actually using webhooks in between each other, this could also theoretically be effective, because there would be an element of distrust that needs to be allowed for that communication to continue. So we can see a high utilization in the market. It would affect theoretically everyone. Now, to stem on a vital, again, topical point here is when we think about certificates and those decisions made in organizations today, most of the people that initially made decisions either to invest in specific existing CAs, specific certificate solutions, are theoretically possibly not with the organization any longer. We saw a massive hype on the certificate scale round about 22 years ago, where there was obviously expansion from single issue certificates to managing your own CAs and managing your own trust stores, your PKI solutions, expanding upon that, and obviously normalizing. In the last 15 years, SSL certificates have been normalized. Everyone understands the process. Everyone trusts the process. The problem with that is the people that made the initial decisions to go with a specific CA or go with a specific choice in vendors, those people are no longer there. Also, the same use case that happened from a CrowdStrike perspective, a couple of weeks ago, is decisions made by a vendor suddenly theoretically affecting consumers without the ability to interject and without the ability to control that aspect in the environment. We saw how development and production rollouts of changes in the CrowdStrike environment brought down hundreds of thousands of Windows culpable, susceptible Windows servers in a matter of minutes, and how that decision by the vendor itself caused downtime and negative impact to the market. On the right-hand side, you'll see a typical architecture from, back when certificates was in the heyday of a topical point. When we talk about the hype curve, it was at the eclipse of the hype curve. Those architectures that we initially invested our, money from an organizational budget perspective, those architectures have changed. Nothing from a contextual perspective, when we think about ICT security architecture today, really fits into the framework, back in 2005. And the diagram that you'll see on the screen is actually from a very common Scott A. Barnard book that was given to students as a learning mechanism. If you want to become an enterprise architect, this was the book that you need to study from and base your expertise and your involvement into your customer or into your existing organization. Those architectures today do not play and they have no place to play. Now, what we're saying is decisions made by your successors, or sorry, not by your successors, by your previous staff members inside that organization can still be affecting you today. And the same goes to say with the certificate aspect, that decisions to trust in Entrust is obviously going to be affecting you today. So when you think about either the different solutions that are out in the market and how to solve for that problem, our recommendation is to provide more thought into how your choices of today fit into your existing architecture and your existing security plans. Now, this is also something that's freely available on Entrust's website. Entrust has a solution at the moment that they are proposing to customers. This solution involves a partnership that they have with, that they newly created with SSL.com, which is another CA. And what they're going to be doing is they're going to be transferring all of their existing certificates onto a new CA. And this is the process that they explain it, and they try and minimize, at least from a verbal perspective, that this would theoretically not have an impact to a customer. I can categorically say, as a technical person in the industry, when dealing with certificates and when dealing with trust and tokenization especially, you need to be very conscious and aware that any changes has effect. Any changes from a private or from a public perspective has an effect. And it would cause you from an organizational perspective to have to either redevelop, change, and obviously a lot of effort that we need to go in to facilitate for this change. And we're saying that, whilst you are already being forced into an avenue, we don't like that. Rather, readopt the correct strategy that fits in line to your KPIs and organizational matrices. Right, now, just quickly topical, out of context here on the screen, I've got some of the largest banks in the sector in the region. The let's call it the Africa and East Africa and Middle East context. A lot of you will recognize brands here left and right. So I just did a test on all of the login pages that these web pages, these banks utilize from their banking authentication perspective. And I'd like to gander a guess from everyone here about how many of these would theoretically be affected. And I'm going to start slowly but surely taking some of the names off. If the name disappears from the screen, they utilize different certificates. And again, I mentioned this explicitly on their login pages, and I'll get back to why I explicitly mentioned that. If the name disappears, then they don't use Entrust. So we've got APSA that would go by. We've got some recognized names in the EMEA market that would go by. The unfortunate thing is, as far as my research came to, it was about 50% of the banks that I just checked up on in the last couple of days that still utilize Entrust certificates as part of the authentication process, which is quite scary if you think about the context that this is only consumer authentication pages that still utilize Entrust certificates. And all of these organizations, at least that we deal with from a CyberOne perspective, all of them are having very high-level conversations about this specific decision that has been forced upon them now. They weren't planning to change CAs, but now a choice in the vendor that they trusted is forcing them to reevaluate where they trust. And it's critically important that we have to understand that any of these organizations, especially in the banking sector, this goes without saying that the telcos and public sector and other private sector customers are all affected. But just in the banking sector, if you reach a web page of one of these banks and you get a distrust notification, you are going to lose trust in the actual brand itself. And again, I mentioned this is only on the login pages. Certificates are utilized between systems and services and between mobile and web applications and target-side server-side applications as well. And you don't normally have control over every single certificate. So when that question is asked about Entrust utilization inside your organization, mostly, and in my experience, mostly the answer is we think we don't have an Entrust certificate, but we cannot 100% say whether we don't have one. And that's also obviously a problem. Now, I'd like to just raise a second poll quickly here. Rafil, if you can put the second poll up on the screen for me, please. The question is, have you interacted with any of the logos, the banks that you just saw on the screen that still utilize Entrust certificates? Have you interacted with them before? Are you aware of them? Answers yes, no, and last option is that you don't want to answer because you fear for your personal identity and personal security to be at risk, which is comical on its own. Right, now, again, the typical impact for customers is that's how the screen will look. The moment that certificate becomes distrusted, that is how the screen will look. This is not a great place to be if you're a consumer. I can honestly state that the moment that this happens to me on any site, I back away. I back away. Notwithstanding the fact that this could also impact the actual end user experience from a mobile perspective and from a application to application perspective. But we can always say that changes in end user behavior and changes that cause them distrust do lead to revenue loss. So this is a critical point for your customers, and you as customers need to decide where are you investing from a CA perspective. Now, what are the critical next steps for customers at the moment? Firstly, you need to identify and catalog all the certificates that you have in use. It's a very, very difficult process. You have static certificates, you've got self-minted certificates, you've got certificates if you have your own PKI solutions that you manage and maintain, and then you've got third-party certificates from service providers that you interact with as an organization. You need to build a catalog of this, figure out when the STLs are expiring, and how that would theoretically have a downward effect on your actual business process. The second step is you need to revoke and replace. Even from Entrust's own recommendations, it will be a revoke and replace process. They will have to reissue those certificates on the SSL.com CA, and you will have to re-implement those certificates either way. Be it a Sectigo solution, be it another CA, you will have to do this action. You have possibly no choice due to the decision taken by the Mozilla and the Chrome Root Authority team. And then the last one is obviously from a certificate management perspective, you need to think about how can you actually start proactively measure your compliance from a certificate perspective between systems and services? And how do you actually think about the expiry and the remint of your trusted certificates? Now that I've created a bit of a scare and a bit of a polling question scenario, Rafiel, can you post the results of the QA quickly in the chat? And then I'd like to hand over to Jason. Jason is going to talk about the solution as to this problem set that I've just explained, the impact that it has, and what are your solutions when you also think about the Sectigo solution set. Jason, over to you.
Thanks, Christian. All right. Are there additional slides here?
I'll navigate for you, Jason, if you prompt.
Thank you. Perfect. All right. Well, Christian, thank you so much for a lot of that background. It's very important information for a lot of people, and I like the way you put it, I like the way you framed it. This affects a lot of people, and there's a key thing that you said earlier that I think that if for everybody who's listening, if you only get one thing out of this webinar, it is something that Christian said, which is there are probably a lot of consumers of SSL certificates who might not know at a moment's notice whether or not they are utilizing Entrust certificates or certificates that will be distrusted by this event in November. And to me, that's a scary thing. I've been working in the CA industry for a very long time, and one of the things that I would like all of you to keep in mind is that you cannot manage what you don't know you have. And these kinds of events within the certificate authority business, if you're consuming SSL certificates, which would be all of you, all of your potentially all of your clients, depending on what your relationship is with these people. I think that the fact that it is difficult in 2024 for many people to know whether or not they are using a specific vendor's SSL certificates is really, really dangerous. I'd like to make the argument that all certificates should be managed certificates, and part of a managed certificate is the ability to have visibility to the certificates that you are using. And if you think about this misissuance event from Entrust, the misissuance itself is actually less interesting to me than the ability to have to deal with a mass revocation event and to know that you have certificates that are affected by a mass revocation. And I would like to draw a parallel to a future industry disruption, which will be the shortening of certificate lifespans from 1 year to 90 days. Because essentially, that will mean that every 90 days, depending on when you've acquired your certificate, there will be essentially a revocation event. It's not really a revocation, it's an expiry event, is what it is. But if you don't know the certificates that you have, how do you know how to be able to manage those things? Every certificate should be a managed certificate. So this slide here is basically showing that it's the trend towards using certificates is growing, and it has been growing for decades. And as digital transformation is occurring in every industry worldwide, the usage of certificates is only increasing more and more and more. And so therefore, managed certificates from way back in the day when people were first starting up their architectures, as Christian said earlier, the need to manage those certificates was less in the past, perhaps because there was less certificates. It's not true anymore. The fact of the matter is we have so many certificates right now. It is a ubiquitous technology, and every certificate should be a managed certificate. Next slide. And so as certificates go from what was 5- and 10-year certificates prior to 2012, and then down to 3-year certificates, 2-year certificates, now down to 1-year certificates, in the future, we will be dealing with 90-day certificates. And I'd like to offer up the fact that Google itself, through the Chrome program that we've been talking about for the past little while, has also proposed the idea of 10-day certificates. And people might be asking themselves, what's the purpose of going down to 90 or 10-day certificates? Well, going down to 90-day, I think it's a good move. It's the right thing. These kinds of misissuance events that we've been talking about that do occur within our industry mean that if you have a certificate that only lasts 90 days or even down to 10 days, the risks of key compromise, the risks associated with misissuance are much less if you have certificates that have a shorter lifespan. So from a security standpoint, it's the right thing to do. The problem with shorter certificate lifespans is that it requires us to have a very different mindset about how we deal with certificates. The old days of manual certificate renewals, or as I love what Christiaan said, so many people don't even know what certificates they have. You must start to have a very different mindset and realize that certificate lifecycle management is the right way to move forward with any of your certificates that you're operating right now or operating with your clients. Next slide, please. So if you're going from 90 day 1-year certificates down to 90-day certificates, it actually means that the risk of outages due to certificate expiries is now multiplied. The risk is now multiplied by between 4 and 5 at least. And I think that one of the reasons we don't have 90-day certificates yet is because of we don't have enough of people who are utilizing certificates who are managing those certificates properly and having a certificate agility, the ability to be able to rotate and renew certificates on an automated and quick basis. That is the reason why we're talking about this Entrust Distrust event, and it's the reason why I am telling you guys now that you must be planning to be able to deal with 90-day certificates in the near future. Next slide, please. Right, and so we've just been talking about certificate agility, and I think that the next little section I'd like to speak on right now has to do with cryptographic agility, because I think what you're going to find in the 2028 to 2029 up to the 2030 is the cryptographic algorithms that are currently used within all of our certificates. The RSA algorithm, the elliptic curve cryptography algorithm, or known as ECC, these cryptographic algorithms are the ones that are at risk when quantum computing becomes a reality. Once quantum computers are sufficiently capable, the cryptographic algorithms of RSA and ECC, which we rely on today for security in our certificates, they face deprecation. Now, we have faced deprecation in the past. Hashing algorithms such as SHA-1, you might have heard about that. That was deprecated and caused a lot of work within the industry that was required. I think that this event is something that you need to be looking forward to now, at not the least of which is due to the harvest and decrypt problem, where adversaries are currently recording RSA and ECC encrypted data in transit and will be able to decrypt this data at some point in the future, perhaps around the 2030 timeframe. If you have secrets that you're transmitting right now with those legacy cryptographic algorithms, I would highly recommend that the first job you need to take is, where are all of your cryptographic assets and what secrets are you transmitting across those cryptographic assets? Those are two very important pieces of inventory that you guys need to be looking at right now. Next slide, please. So thankfully, NIST, which is a US-based standards body, globally recognized and respected, has just not only selected but also produced finalized standards for several of the new quantum resistant cryptographic algorithms. So thank goodness that a lot of hard work has been done to be able to prepare us for the next set of cryptographic algorithms to be used in our certificates and other forms of cryptography. This is good news. But what it does mean is that there's no longer any reason to wait. And I use this term colloquially. Um, Time to get your hands dirty, learning about these new cryptographic algorithms, because the world that we live in right now and the world that we're going to be living in the future with a much more rich and complex set of cryptographic algorithms will actually dictate a lot of different ways in which you do your cryptography. For publicly trusted certificates, stand by, stay tuned, and the industry that I belong to will be giving you a lot more information about what that's going to look like. But I think right now, for those of you who have private trust certificates for purposes of authentication and signing, this information on this slide right here is important for you to start to understand and get educated on. Thank you. Next slide. So right now, what I would say is the most important thing to do is take inventory of all of your cryptographic assets, and it's not just your publicly trusted certificates. That would be step one. If you already have a certificate lifecycle management system, you've already taken the first important step towards having visibility to your cryptographic assets. I think what's now important is that once you have taken that inventory, you can start to take a look at what these standards bodies such as NIST and the IETF, understanding what hybrid certificates are. Hybrid certificates are actually capable of having both post-quantum as well as legacy cryptographic algorithms within a single certificate. There are systems that will help to be able to be bridged into the future with hybrid certificates. So I would say you'll need to stay tuned very closely to what the CAB Forum, ETSI, and NIST are doing in terms of releasing information into the public about what the future looks like. Please believe me, it will affect you. I think that what you need to be thinking about is private trust certificates are things that you should be thinking about very soon in terms of what secrets do I need to encrypt differently to protect them into the future. And then obviously with any information coming out of the CAB forum for post-quantum, they're working on that right now. They're thinking about it. There will be meetings later this fall and into next year. And you're going to want to know about the changes that will be upcoming in terms of post-quantum and quantum-resistant publicly trusted certificates. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit more about the Harvest Now Decrypt problem. Very simply put, right now you have streams of SSL encrypted information, but data in transit that are encrypted with RSA and ECC cryptographic algorithms. Basically, anything that is utilizing publicly trusted certificate is categorized as this right now. But you may even have RSA or ECC based authentication sessions that are occurring and data that might even be encrypted in other ways with those legacy algorithms. Any of what I just said can be recorded in its encrypted form and technically safe right now. But it will not be safe when quantum computers with a sufficient number of stable qubits, in other words, sufficiently capable quantum computers, become available in the next few years. Those recorded secrets will be decrypted. And the risk is this: there are, let's say, insurance documents, finance transactions, health records. These are things that will be valid data, valid secrets that you're going to want to keep as a secret deep into the future, past 2030. The problem is, if you are currently encrypting those things with classic algorithms such as RSA or ECC, those secrets will become at risk later. All right. This is why I'd like to tell everybody the post-quantum problem is not a tomorrow problem. It's a right now problem. And right from the beginning of this webinar, when we started to talk about having visibility to certificates, this is the exact problem that you need to solve with post-quantum. If you don't know what certificates you have, you don't know what cryptographic algorithms that those certificates are using, that's bad. Therefore, every certificate should be a managed certificate. And if that's the case, you've taken several steps along the path of helping to mitigate this quantum problem. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to go through this very quickly, but at Sectigo, we have come up with a blueprint for how to think about the transition to quantum safe cryptography. And, you know, the first letter Q is all about your quantum exposure. I keep repeating this over and over because it's so important. You must take inventory of your cryptographic assets and therefore uncover all of the risk that you face once the panic button will eventually be hit when quantum computers become sufficiently capable. So that's the letter U. It's all about uncovering that risk from the inventory that you've taken in step Q. Once you've gotten past the uncovering of the risk, you must assess and strategize. This comes down to which secrets need to be protected sooner than later. You will find that once you've taken your inventory and you've uncovered the risk, the strategy of what steps do I now take will come down to that inventory of which secrets are being protected right now with classic algorithms and which secrets would I not want to be decrypted after 2030. That's that letter A, assess and strategize. That letter N is now about once you have assessed the problem fully and you've strategized what is my prioritization of what I need to do, and that's when you start thinking about navigating your implementation. That letter N. It's because then the rubber starts to hit the road. Do I need to set up a new private CA? What are the things that are the CAB forum are telling me about publicly trusted certificates and the changes? How do I think about certificate lifecycle management in this new world? And then, of course, finally, with the letter T, tracking and managing. Again, that word manage comes up. I do not think you will be able to live in the future in a world where you are still doing manual certificate renewals and not knowing which vendors you're getting your certificates from. Every certificate should be a managed certificate. My first message is the same as my last message. Next slide, please. All right, that term certificate lifecycle management, I've used it a few times. Let's move to the next slide and we'll talk about that quickly. So certificate-based outages, you don't want that. Christian, gave it a perfect slide and an explanation earlier about the fact that if a browser gets a certificate expiry warning, you're probably not going to that website. If that's your website, you're losing business. That's just bad. You have to avoid outages. And the risk of outages from misissuance, mass revocation events, any of these things we've been talking about so far in this webinar, these are all things that cause outage risk. You want to avoid that risk at all costs and utilize certificate lifecycle management to make sure that every certificate is a managed certificate. More and more and more certificates are out there. Manual renewals become unscalable. It cannot be considered acceptable anymore. And therefore, certificate lifecycle management is the way to go and solves these problems. And we talked about post-quantum, and I know that's a little ways off, but here's the beautiful message to the story. If you adopt certificate lifecycle management, you actually have taken the first, second, and third important steps to mitigating quantum risk. Next slide. All right, guys, I'm going to let you look at this slide, and I hope that you study it, but I just want to point out the sheer complexity that is causing the proliferation of digital certificates. The good news is digital certificates are still, and have been for a very long time, the preeminent way to protect a lot of your digital assets. That's just the way it is, and that's the way it will be in the future. But this proliferation and increase of scale of usage of digital certificates means that certificate lifecycle management becomes more important than ever. Next slide. And I'd like to land here because if you guys are asking yourselves, what is certificate lifecycle management? I'll offer you this. You can't manage what you don't know you have. Therefore, visibility across the top. You must have visibility to your certificates. And you might be acquiring certificates from places that you're not even, like, you might have a rogue shadow IT team that might have gotten a Let's Encrypt certificate using it for some other purpose that you weren't aware of. That certificate is not on your manual Excel spreadsheet that you're managing. Therefore, CLM is also about discovery. You need to get the certificate to the place where it belongs. Deployment technologies are part of CLM. Automatic renewals, being able to have revocations and replacements of certificates. If these things were more ubiquitous, we would not have had problems that led to the distrust event. Automatic renewals, automatic revocations, automatic replacements, these kinds of automations offered you by CLM are the future. And I'm going to offer a final pillar of CLM, integrations. In other words, certificate lifecycle management should not live in a silo. It should live side by side with your messaging systems to warn you about certificate expiries so that you can deal with them. Also, if you have source systems, SIM systems that require data that are either coming from your CLM or going to your CLM, integrations are important for modern IT systems. I could spend an entire hour on this slide alone, going very deep into what each of these things mean. But when we talked about outages, when we talked about mass revocations, we talked about the 90-day problem, we talked about the quantum risk. The 5 pillars of CLM are how you mitigate that risk. Next slide. Right, so this is basically everything I just said earlier, which is certificate lifecycle management is all about avoiding outages. Key compromises do happen, private key compromises, therefore preventing security breaches. And if you guys are running any kind of governance programs and need to stay compliant and pass audits, certificate lifecycle management can help you. Save time, cost, and resources. If you are faced with a distrust event from any certificate authority, the ability to deal with it once you've employed certificate lifecycle management, it becomes almost a non-problem because most of your problem is automated away. It's the modern way to utilize certificates of any kind. And the team members that you have, I would rather see Linux administrators doing their hard job every single day rather than manually installing certificates every 90 days. Trust me, your people should be doing bigger and better and more important things. That's how certificate lifecycle management helps. Next slide. So I just want to point out on the final slide, I think this is that a colleague of mine by the name of Tim Callan and myself, Jason Soronko, we have a podcast where we talk about these things in depth, typically twice a week on a podcast that's called the Root Causes Podcast. And this is available to you anywhere where you consume your podcast. And that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason. I'd like to just open it up, Rafiwa, if you can enable everyone to chat if they have a question for Jason or for myself. But Jason, just a quick question from for you playing in the space on the Sectigo side. How are you seeing new customers, and how are they actually approaching this problem of previous investment that they've made on an interest perspective, theoretical risk and practical risk going forward? What are they also doing from a messaging and prepping their messaging teams with regards to that customer user experience and even staff user experience? Is there a massive uptake in this space?
We're finding that any form of machine identity management, of which certificate lifecycle management is a part of, is having a massive uptake. And I can tell you, Christian, that this is well known typically to very large entities that could not deal with risk in such a sloppy way that most of us do, unfortunately. And therefore, I think most organizations now are starting to realize, and it's such a good news story. Christian, I'm going to go back to this story, and this is the way that I'm going to sum up the analogy here. You had talked about how in years past, SSL usage was not ubiquitous. It was 10% of the internet, 20%, 50%, 75%. And then, of course, Google came out with this idea of HTTPS everywhere. And now we're dealing with a world where certificates have completely proliferated everywhere. And in terms of the web PKI and websites themselves, it's now 99.7% of the internet or more. So what I would like to say is, now that every website, every domain is protected by an SSL certificate, I think what's happening is slowly but surely people are realizing you need to go one step further. And therefore, every certificate needs to be a managed certificate. And I think that that's the oversimplified way of saying the uptake of certificate lifecycle management, not just for publicly trusted certificates, but for all of your certificate types, is something that people are finally waking up to. And it has to do with mass digital transformation that not the least of which was the COVID epidemic, 4 or 5 years ago, where everybody had to be online, everybody had to be authenticated, everybody was doing data in transit encryption. Certificate usage proliferated so much in such a short period of time that it's no longer an option to have certificates that are just kind of sitting around that you don't know. What's my vendor? When is the expiry date? You need automated systems that know this so that you don't have to think about it anymore, because the risk of outage is too great. You actually said it best, Christian. Thanks for that.
Yeah, and I think maybe just to also just hop on your point there, our utilization of certificates, from a consumer perspective, your normalized citizen, your normalized consumer, when they think about certificates, they immediately, obviously, they don't understand that from a technical perspective, but they do understand that, if you go to a website and your browser says it's a trusted website, you can trust it. And there's kind of like a flow through of trust, right? Because you trust in your browser, you trust in your OS, and you kind of hope that everyone has patched everything. I mean, that's the typical consumer aspect of it. But the concept of certificates and their utilization is obviously more far-reaching than just websites itself. It's those interlinks between organizations, between third parties, and then inside the organizations between systems and services. As we've also seen, and one of the areas of specialization that we play in is on that API layer stack, understanding that risk and that context, and how many authentication parameters, at least from a web API between applications, are still relying on point-to-point, either Chromium or a specific web session that actually is initiated, and then that trust is then solidified, and then communication takes place. A lot of the certificate usage that we have is obviously, firstly, the visible one, where your consumers will go to a page, or your staff will go to a page, and that page seems distrusted. But also that back-end utilization between system services, and then also your third parties. Where are you interacting to from an organization perspective? What other systems and services are trusting based off of the Google CA, and how much of that are you in control of? And you raise that as a valid topic point as well, is a lot of organizations think, right, when I think about my SSL certificate, it must be my website. And people wrongly think that. You need to think about how systems and services have changed their method of communication over the past couple of years. Jason, I've got one more question for you. Obviously, this is an event that has taken place in the industry, similar to what the CrowdStrike event has taken place. Obviously, Entrust didn't plan for this, the same as CrowdStrike didn't plan for their outage. What type of contingency plans and validation does Sectigo offer to this conversation? I mean, what comfort would organizations have if they reinvest and they invest in the Sectigo brand from a CA perspective? How can they ensure that that choice that they make and that future theoretical distrust event would not happen and affect Sectigo?
Certainly. I would say that what's important to note is that misissuance by a certificate authority, any certificate authority, I actually consider inevitable now and in the future. Just like the 90-day certificate may be coming, just like key compromise may happen to any of us, to you guys as users of the certificates. These kinds of risk events we need to consider as inevitable things. This Entrust distrust event, I almost wish we didn't even use the vendor's name. These kinds of things could just occur. Distrust is a harsh one. It's the misissuance that I'm most worried about. And the reason I'm still worried about these categories of risk is because most people have not actually really thought about that risk yet. They procure the certificates, they use the certificates, the usage is proliferating, but the management of those certificates needs to grow at the same pace. And so at Sectigo, the way that we have thought about it is this. Our compliance program really, and our participation in the CAB forum is such that we really do believe in the rules. The CAB forum rules are there for a reason. They need to be followed. And mass revocation events like what we've just seen that led to the distrust, they can be avoided. Distrust can be avoided due to misissuance events or any other risk categories I talked about if you employ certificate lifecycle management. If all of your certificates are managed certificates, most of or all of this risk mitigation has occurred. It is such a great investment in terms of your overall security posture for so many reasons. You're getting so many risk categories mitigated for you. And that's why Sectigo, over the years that I've worked here, has been so focused on not just being a certificate authority, but presenting first-class certificate lifecycle management, hinging on those pillars of CLM that we talked about earlier, that helps you to mitigate that risk. And I wholeheartedly believe you should not be procuring certificates without procuring management technology to go along with it. And Christian, we wouldn't be here today with Entrust, with that distrust event, if those certificates could have been more easily replaced after a mass revocation. That's just the simple truth.
Definitely so. I don't see any questions raised in the chat box. So, Jason, I'd like to just thank you for your time. Thank you for the audience that attended. Please feel free to reach out if you want a copy of the slide deck and a copy of the recording itself. We'll make sure to make that available. And yeah, thank you, Jason. Thank you, team. And enjoy the rest of your week and good luck with this distrust event. please reach out to us. Thank you.